In the winter of 1943, London was a city of secrets. Beneath the rumble of air raid sirens and the quiet resilience of a war-weary population, another kind of battle was being waged. One fought not with tanks or rifles, but with deception, disguise, and imagination. Deep inside the labyrinthine offices of British naval intelligence, a handful of men and women were preparing to alter the course of the war, using the most unlikely of weapons, a dead man. By early 1943, the Allies faced a crucial turning point. The North African campaign was nearing victory, and the next strategic question loomed: where to strike next in Europe? Prime Minister Winston Churchill and the Allied High Command agreed. The invasion of Fortress Europe had to begin with the Mediterranean. Sicily was the logical target, the soft underbelly of Axis defenses. But it was also the most obvious choice. German intelligence would anticipate it. Hitler's forces had already begun reinforcing the island, ready for an invasion that seemed inevitable. For the Allies, secrecy and surprise were everything. The entire success of the coming operation depended on convincing the Germans that the real target lay elsewhere. If they could be made to believe the Allies were heading toward Greece or Sardinia, then perhaps Sicily could be taken with fewer lives lost. But deception on that scale, a lie so vast it could mislead an empire, required more than fake maps or coded messages. It needed a story so believable, so human, that even the sharpest minds of the Abwehr, German military intelligence, would accept it without question. The responsibility for this deception fell upon an elite team within Britain's Secret 20 Committee, known simply as the XX Committee. Its name was a sly joke, XX, or double cross. Chaired by MI5 officer John Masterman, this group specialized in turning captured German agents and feeding the enemy a steady diet of controlled misinformation. It was here that Lieutenant Commander Ewan Montagu of the Royal Navy and Flight Lieutenant Charles Cholmondeley of the Royal Air Force conceived one of the boldest deceptions in military history. The concept was simple, horrifyingly simple. They would create a false identity for a dead body, plant secret invasion plans on it, and arrange for it to be found by German agents. The corpse would become a courier of lies, a silent messenger carrying false intelligence that could shift the balance of power in the Mediterranean. To work, it had to be flawless. Every detail, from the uniform's buttons to the ink on the letters, had to survive scrutiny. In Montagu's later words, "Our problem was to make the Germans believe what we wanted them to believe, and to do so through a single man who had never lived." The idea wasn't entirely new. British intelligence had previously considered using a corpse to mislead the enemy during the invasion of North Africa in 1942, but it had been deemed too grotesque, too risky. Now, with thousands of lives at stake and time running short, there was no room for hesitation. The deception had to succeed. As plans for Operation Husky, the invasion of Sicily, moved forward, the deception project was officially approved by the British Chiefs of Staff and given the codename Operation Mincemeat. It would become part of a broader deception effort known as Operation Barclay, designed to disguise the true focus of Allied operations across the Mediterranean. The stage was set, but execution would be perilous. They needed a body that looked like a recent victim of a plane crash or drowning, one who could plausibly be carrying top-secret papers, and above all, they needed time. Every aspect of the mission would depend on precision timing, from the release of the body to the movement of intelligence through enemy channels. In a smoky underground office in the Admiralty, Montagu and Cholmondeley pinned maps to the walls, scribbled notes, and drafted the details of an imaginary man, a British officer who had never existed. They envisioned his rank, his life story, even his love letters. Every element had to be authentic, because the Germans would verify every trace of his existence. The devil, Montagu wrote later, is not in the lie itself, but in the detail that makes it true. But before the fictional major could be born, they would need to find a real man to become him, a body that could endure the scrutiny of pathologists, spies, and enemy officers. And that was a problem no one in British intelligence had solved before. As Churchill himself had said of deception, "In wartime, truth is so precious that she should always be attended by a bodyguard of lies." Now, that bodyguard was about to take literal form. Outside, London's streets glowed faintly under blackout curtains. Bombers droned above the Channel, and across Europe, millions of soldiers prepared for battles yet to come. But in a single naval office, a handful of men began constructing an illusion so convincing that it would change the course of history. They had the plan. What they lacked was a corpse. The hunt for that one man, the man who would fool an empire, was about to begin. The plan had been approved, but now came the hardest question. Who would be the man to die for Operation Mincemeat? It couldn't be a soldier killed in action. Too many records, too many questions. It had to be someone unclaimed, someone whose death could vanish quietly into secrecy. In the early months of 1943, that answer arrived in the most tragic and unlikely form. At St. Pancras Hospital in London, a 34-year-old Welshman named Glyndwr Michael had died after consuming rat poison. He was homeless, destitute, and utterly forgotten. To the coroner, his death was unremarkable, a case of despair during wartime hardship. But to Ewan Montagu and Charles Cholmondeley, Glyndwr Michael was the missing piece. His body showed no visible signs of injury, only the faint traces of chemical poisoning, which could pass as drowning after a plane crash. Quietly, under cover of official secrecy, the coroner's office released his remains to British naval intelligence. The process of transformation began. Glyndwr Michael would disappear from the world, replaced by a man who had never lived. Major William Martin, Royal Marines. He would be given an entire life, complete with an identity card, theatre tickets, a bus receipt, and letters from a fictional fiancée named Pam. Every object, every fold of paper was crafted to breathe life into the illusion. Major Martin was to be a young, capable officer stationed in combined operations, travelling on secret duty. His briefcase would contain the most important item of all: top-secret letters suggesting that the Allied invasion would strike Greece and Sardinia, not Sicily. In the quiet offices of Room 13 at the Admiralty, the details came together. Montagu personally oversaw the creation of Martin's uniform, ensuring it bore the correct regimental insignia and naval tailoring marks. His identification card was stamped with authentic service seals. Even his photograph, showing a smiling, confident officer, was a carefully staged fake. An MI5 secretary's fiancée posed for the picture, unaware that his image would become one of the most extraordinary covers of the war. The deception's centerpiece was a letter written from General Sir Archibald Nye, Vice Chief of the Imperial General Staff, to General Sir Harold Alexander, the commander of Allied forces in North Africa. Its contents appeared genuine, a casual discussion of Allied strategy, referencing false operations in Greece and Sardinia, while subtly downplaying Sicily as a diversion. Every phrase had to sound natural yet strategic, as if never meant for enemy eyes. But the real brilliance of the plan lay not in the documents themselves, but in their subtle imperfections. Intelligence officers knew that German analysts were experts in detecting forgeries. A document that looked too clean, too precise, would be suspicious. So they made it real by making it flawed, slightly creased, water-stained, even fingerprinted. The illusion had to feel human. Meanwhile, Montagu and Cholmondeley pondered the next logistical nightmare: how to deliver their creation into enemy hands. Spain, though officially neutral, was riddled with German agents and sympathizers. The port city of Huelva, on Spain's southern coast, had long been a hub for Axis espionage. There, German Abwehr officers routinely obtained intelligence from local Spanish officials. If Major Martin were to wash ashore near Huelva, the odds were good that his papers would fall into German hands. It was a daring plan, but not without moral unease. Montagu later admitted, "There was something rather horrible about it. We were playing with a man's body, using it as a weapon of war." But in 1943, with tens of thousands of Allied lives at stake, hesitation had no place. The mission was approved by Admiral John Godfrey, Director of Naval Intelligence, and finally authorized by Churchill himself, who remarked with dry humor, "In wartime, nothing is too ridiculous to be true." The plan's name, Operation Mincemeat, was chosen partly for secrecy and partly for its dark irony. Few outside the 20 committee knew its purpose. To those within, it symbolized the grotesque yet necessary absurdity of deception in war. The operation's technical aspects were coordinated with the Royal Navy's submarine service, who would be tasked with transporting and releasing the body at the precise location off Spain's coast. The clock was ticking. By April 1943, preparations for the invasion of Sicily, codenamed Operation Husky, were nearly complete. The deception had to precede it by weeks, allowing time for the false intelligence to be discovered, examined, and acted upon by the Germans. The timing was as critical as the lie itself. Finally, in mid-April, everything was ready. Major William Martin lay preserved in a sealed canister filled with dry ice, his briefcase attached securely to his wrist. Inside, the forged letters waited, silent, potent, and deadly in their intent. The submarine HMS Seraph, under the command of Lieutenant Norman Jewell, was ordered to prepare for a top-secret delivery. As the mission's date approached, London's intelligence officers grew tense. There would be no second chance. If the body was discovered too soon, too late, or under the wrong conditions, the Germans would see through the ruse, and Operation Husky could fail before it even began. In a private note, Montagu wrote, "We are not merely deceiving the enemy, we are wagering our future on a dead man's story." And so, with the tide and time aligned, the stage was set for one of the strangest operations in modern warfare, a silent courier about to be sent on his final, most vital mission. Dawn broke over Scotland's chilly northern coast in April 1943 as the submarine HMS Seraph prepared to slip beneath the waves. Aboard her narrow hull, sealed inside a metal canister marked "Handle with Care, Optical Instruments," lay one of the strangest and most secret cargoes of the war. Inside was Major William Martin, Royal Marines, a man who had never lived, yet whose mission might decide the fate of the Mediterranean. Lieutenant Norman Jewell, commander of Seraph, had been briefed personally by Rear Admiral John Godfrey, Director of Naval Intelligence. Even among his own crew, only a handful knew the truth of the mission. To most, it was just another clandestine run, a strange errand under orders from the highest levels of command. But to Jewell, the weight of what lay in that canister was immense. If Operation Mincemeat failed, the deception would be exposed, and tens of thousands of Allied troops preparing to invade Sicily could die as a result. Below deck, the submarine's engines hummed softly as she set course south through the Irish Sea, down the coast of Portugal towards Spain's southwestern tip. The journey was tense. Seraph had to avoid German U-boats and Axis patrol aircraft. Every sonar ping, every distant rumble of a ship's propellers raised the tension among the men. Hidden beneath the silence of the sea, the future of an entire invasion rode with them. Back in London, Ewan Montagu and Charles Cholmondeley waited anxiously. The logistics had been painstakingly planned. The release point off Huelva, Spain, had been chosen with surgical precision. Spanish fishermen frequently worked the area, and prevailing currents would likely carry the body ashore. More importantly, Huelva was home to a known Abwehr agent, Adolf Klaus, who had long cultivated contacts among Spanish officials. If the body was found there, the Germans would know within hours. In the canister, Glyndwr Michael, now Major Martin, lay dressed in his Royal Marines battle dress, life jacket, and trench coat. Attached to his belt was a silver chain carrying a St. Christopher medal, a subtle touch suggesting faith and humanity. In his pockets were the details of a man who had lived a full, believable life. Theatre ticket stubs from the West End, a receipt for an engagement ring, a stern letter from his bank about an overdraft, and tucked in his wallet was a small photograph of Pam, his fiancée, played by an MI5 clerk named Jean Leslie. Her smiling face, captured in black and white, would soon become part of a deception that would fool an empire. At 4:30 a.m. on April 30th, 1943, HMS Seraph surfaced silently off the coast of Huelva. The water was calm, the horizon barely touched by first light. Jewell and his men lifted the canister carefully onto the deck. The air was thick with tension and the smell of salt and fuel. Jewell ordered the crew to stand at attention as the canister was opened. For a brief moment, the frozen face of the corpse looked peaceful, almost serene. "Stand by to commit the body," Jewell said quietly. Wrapped in his life jacket, the body of Major William Martin was gently released into the cold Atlantic waters. His briefcase, chained to his wrist, bobbed beside him. The submarine crew paused in silence. Jewell read a brief prayer, the words adapted from the Navy's burial service. "We therefore commit this body to the deep, in sure and certain hope of the resurrection to eternal life." And with that, HMS Seraph slowly submerged, leaving behind the most important body in British intelligence history. For the next several days, all London could do was wait. On the morning of April 30, Spanish fishermen spotted a body floating near the shore of Huelva. They brought it ashore and alerted local authorities. The documents appeared authentic. The man clearly a British officer, drowned perhaps after a plane crash at sea. His briefcase remained securely fastened to his wrist, exactly as intended. Spanish officials informed the British consulate, while quietly alerting their German contacts. To the Abwehr, this was a godsend. An intelligence miracle washed up from the sea. Adolf Klaus and his network quickly arranged for the documents to be examined by Spanish intelligence officers sympathetic to Germany. The Germans were cautious but intrigued. Could this be genuine? The paper quality, the ink, even the handwriting, all seemed legitimate. The documents contained enough casual detail, enough natural human error, to make them irresistible. Within days, photographs of the documents were sent to Berlin. The information reached the desk of Adolf Hitler himself. The Führer, already suspicious of an Allied move through the Balkans, saw confirmation of his fears. Greece and Sardinia were the true targets, not Sicily. Orders were issued almost immediately to reinforce Greece and divert panzer divisions from Sicily's defences. The deception had worked, though London did not yet know it. Meanwhile, the British embassy in Madrid received word that the body of a Major William Martin had been found. A formal request was made for the return of his effects, a move designed to maintain the illusion of authenticity. Spanish authorities complied, but not before the documents had been copied and shared with German intelligence. As HMS Seraph returned silently to port, Lieutenant Joule sent a brief coded message to naval intelligence in London. Mincemeat completed. Back in room 13 of the Admiralty, Montagu received the telegram and exhaled for the first time in days. The operation was no longer in his hands. The body had been found. The bait was in the water. But would the Germans bite? Would Hitler believe the lie? The silence from Madrid would last for weeks. And in that silence, the fate of the coming invasion and the illusion of Major William Martin hung in the balance. By the first week of May 1943, London's war rooms were alive with tension. The body of Major William Martin had been discovered off the coast of Huelva, Spain, and now all that Montagu, Cholmondeley and their colleagues at Naval Intelligence could do was wait. Their carefully crafted deception was now in the hands of fate, and of men they could neither see nor control. For days, messages filtered in from the British embassy in Madrid. The Spanish authorities had recovered the body, buried it with full military honours in the small cemetery of Nuestra Señora under the blazing Andalusian sun. The local British vice-consul, Francis Hazelden, attended the ceremony, solemnly placing a wreath on the grave of a man who had never existed. The name on the headstone read, Major William Martin, Royal Marines, born 1907, died 1943. Greater love hath no man than this. But the real interest lay not in the burial. It lay in the briefcase still chained to Martin's wrist. From Madrid, word came that Spanish naval intelligence had secured the documents. The British consulate pressed for their return, feigning anxiety and outrage, exactly as Montagu's team had planned. The Spanish, playing a double game, stalled. Their neutrality was a fragile fiction. In reality, several of their senior officials maintained direct contact with the Abwehr, Germany's military intelligence agency. Behind closed doors, the documents were opened and examined. In Berlin, the head of the Abwehr, Admiral Wilhelm Canaris, was intrigued by the find. His agents in Spain cabled the information within hours. The documents looked genuine. They bore the watermark of British stationery, signatures of high-ranking officers, and even minor inconsistencies that only real correspondence would contain. Within days, German analysts produced a detailed summary of the contents. The letters referred to Operation Husky, apparently a diversion, and to supposed plans for major landings in Greece and Sardinia. The reaction from the German High Command was electric. On May 12, 1943, intercepted signals showed a shift in German troop movements. Hitler, convinced by the intelligence from Spain, ordered reinforcements to Greece and the Balkans. The 1st Panzer Division was diverted from France, and German defensive preparations in Sicily were quietly scaled back. Luftwaffe reconnaissance flights were redirected over the Aegean. The deception had begun to take hold at the very top of the Nazi hierarchy. But back in London, the Allies could not yet be sure. The beauty of Operation Mincemeat lay in its subtlety, but also in its uncertainty. How much did the Germans truly believe? Had the Spanish tampered too much with the documents, or had they passed them along intact? The only clues came through intercepted German transmissions. decoded painstakingly by cryptanalysts at Bletchley Park. Alan Turing's team monitored every signal from the Abwehr and the Wehrmacht's Southern Command, watching for changes in the German order of battle. In early June, a decrypted message confirmed what Montagu had hoped for. German intelligence had accepted the Mincemeat documents as genuine. The message referred to British documents found at Huelva, confirming planned operations in Greece. It was the first solid sign that the ruse had worked. Still, the tension was unbearable. In his diary, Montagu wrote, "We live in a state of suspended animation. If the enemy suspects, if the ruse is exposed, it will be the end, not only of the plan, but of countless men preparing to fight for Sicily." As the weeks passed, Hitler's belief hardened. On June 15th, he sent a personal directive to Field Marshal Erwin Rommel, ordering fortifications in the Peloponnese and Crete. The Führer wrote, "The enemy feint towards Sicily is only a cover for the main operation against Greece." To the Allied intelligence community, reading these decrypted messages was like witnessing a miracle. The ultimate confirmation that a single corpse had successfully misled the German high command. Meanwhile, in Spain, the body's discovery continued to cause ripples. The Germans pressed their Spanish contacts for more details, but the British diplomatic facade held strong. Francis Haselden and his team, maintaining their role perfectly, demanded the return of the briefcase as a matter of utmost security. Spanish officials, wishing to appear cooperative, eventually complied, sending the documents back to London on May 13th. British analysts examined them under microscopes, confirming their worst and best fears at once. The letters had been opened and resealed. The Germans had seen everything. Now all they could do was trust that the illusion had been convincing. In the war rooms beneath Whitehall, tension gave way to cautious hope. Mincemeat swallowed. Montagu scribbled in a memo, a quiet nod to the success of their deception. Yet even then, the stakes remained enormous. The real invasion, Operation Husky, was set for July 9th, 1943. If the Germans realized the truth before then, all would be lost. And so, the Allies waited, watching German troop deployments, decoding radio chatter, and praying that the deception would hold. By late June, it was clear that the trap had sprung. The Germans were convinced. Divisions that could have been defending Sicily now stood hundreds of miles away, guarding Greek shores against an invasion that would never come. British and American forces massed in the Mediterranean, their target unguarded and unsuspecting. But for Montagu, the work was far from over. The operation's success could never be publicly celebrated, and the man who had made it possible, Glinda Michael, the forgotten Welshman turned Major Martin, would remain a secret even in death. And yet, as Allied troops prepared to set sail, one question lingered in Montagu's mind. Could a lie this perfect stay hidden forever? The answer would come soon, amid the roar of engines and the thunder of invasion across the Sicilian coast. In the early hours of July 9th, 1943, under a veil of storm clouds and sea spray, Operation Husky, the Allied invasion of Sicily, began. Thousands of ships stretched across the Mediterranean, carrying more than 160,000 soldiers from the British, American, and Canadian forces. Paratroopers of the US, 82nd and British 1st Airborne Divisions leapt into darkness over the island, while amphibious landings unfolded along the southern shores near Gela, Licata, and Pacino. It was one of the largest seaborne invasions in history, and, unknown to most who took part, it was made possible by a single corpse that had washed ashore weeks earlier on a distant Spanish beach. From the outset, something was clear. The Germans were unprepared. Intelligence reports from Ultra, the British code-breaking operation at Bletchley Park, confirmed that large Axis formations had been shifted to Greece and Sardinia in anticipation of a non-existent Allied invasion. Field Marshal Albert Kesselring, the German commander in the Mediterranean, had redeployed critical panzer divisions and Luftwaffe squadrons northward, leaving Sicily's defences weakened and fragmented. The deception of Operation Mincemeat had taken root so deeply that even as Allied forces stormed Sicilian beaches, Hitler refused to believe Sicily was the main target. He remained convinced that the assault was merely a diversion for a larger strike toward the Balkans. In a message sent to his generals on July 12th, he insisted, The enemy's main thrust will be directed toward Greece. Sicily is a feint. His misplaced certainty bought the Allies priceless time. For men on the ground, that time meant survival. In the first chaotic days of the invasion, fierce resistance came from Italian coastal divisions and scattered German units, including elements of the elite Hermann Göring Panzer Division. But without the reinforcements that Hitler had diverted elsewhere, Axis defenses crumbled faster than expected. Within a week, Allied troops had secured key airfields and pushed inland toward the mountains. The British 8th Army, under General Bernard Montgomery, advanced from the southeast, while the US 7th Army, commanded by General George S. Patton, pushed westward in a lightning drive toward Palermo. The entire campaign unfolded with a sense of disbelief among intelligence officers in London. Montagu and Cholmondeley followed every report from the front lines, aware that each Allied gain validated their extraordinary gamble. Operation Mincemeat had not just succeeded, it had saved lives on a scale they could scarcely comprehend. By late July, the proof of the operation's success reached the highest levels of Allied command. German High Command intercepted no fewer than 20 separate reports reaffirming their false assumption that Greece was the true target. Hitler even ordered the construction of additional fortifications along the Greek coast and the transfer of the 1st Panzer Division from France to Thessaloniki, long after Allied troops were fighting across Sicily. The deception had not only worked, it had persisted. In the aftermath, Ewan Montagu received a private note from Admiral John Godfrey, simply reading, "The bodyguard of lies has done its duty." It was a quiet acknowledgement of success. No fanfare, no medals, no public glory. For the small circle of men who had devised Operation Mincemeat, victory was measured in silence. Meanwhile, on the ground in Sicily, the cost of war was still heavy. The campaign would last 38 days, claiming more than 24,000 Allied casualties. But without the confusion and redeployment caused by the deception, those numbers might have been far higher. By August 17, 1943, the last Axis forces withdrew across the Strait of Messina into mainland Italy. The island was in Allied hands. Less than 2 months later, Mussolini's fascist regime collapsed, and Italy signed an armistice, a seismic shift in the course of the war. In London, the architects of the deception watched as the ripples of their operations spread far beyond what they had imagined. Operation Mincemeat had proven something profound, that in modern warfare, information or misinformation could be as powerful as any weapon. It showed that truth, when properly distorted, could move armies. But even in triumph, the operation's details remained buried beneath layers of secrecy. The name Major William Martin lived on in British military records as a genuine casualty of war. He was listed in the Times Roll of Honor, and his family, fabricated by naval intelligence, even received letters of condolence. To the world, he was real. Only a handful of people knew otherwise. At the cemetery in Huelva, the grave of Major Martin became a quiet symbol of mystery. Local Spanish villagers occasionally left flowers, unaware that beneath the soil lay not a hero of the Royal Marines, but Glinda Michael, a forgotten man whose body had turned the tide of war. For the intelligence community, the operation's success reinforced a new era of strategic deception. It would later inspire other Allied ruses, including the elaborate Operation Fortitude that misled Hitler about the D-Day landings in Normandy. The lessons of mincemeat, precision, plausibility, and patience became guiding principles for the rest of the war. Yet even among those who orchestrated it, the victory carried a haunting weight. In his memoir, Ewan Montagu reflected, "He was a man who died alone, and through that death helped save thousands. He never knew the part he would play, nor the gratitude history would owe him." As 1943 drew to a close, London streets still bore the scars of the Blitz, but beneath the rubble, victory felt a little closer. Operation Mincemeat had proved that cunning could outwit might, and that sometimes the greatest victories are won not by force, but by imagination. Still, one mystery remained. Who exactly was the man behind Major Martin? His name had been erased from official records, hidden behind classification. Even in success, the truth lay buried, waiting for discovery decades later, when history would finally uncover the man who fooled an empire. By the autumn of 1943, the Allies had secured Sicily, Mussolini had been overthrown, and the long, bloody road to Berlin had begun. Operation Mincemeat, the deception that helped make it possible, was buried deep under the cloak of wartime secrecy. To the world, Major William Martin, Royal Marines, was a hero who had perished in duty. To a small handful within British intelligence, he was something far stranger, the perfect lie that saved tens of thousands of lives. The aftermath of Mincemeat revealed just how deeply the operation had influenced the war's trajectory. Hitler's continued obsession with the Balkans persisted into early 1944, causing him to hold back divisions from Italy that might have slowed the Allied advance up the peninsula. Even the Luftwaffe, struggling to defend both the Eastern Front and the Mediterranean, diverted valuable reconnaissance aircraft toward Greece. The deception's aftershocks rippled for months, a silent echo of a dead man's message. In the secrecy of Whitehall's underground offices, the operation's architects took quiet satisfaction. Admiral John Godfrey congratulated his staff with characteristic understatement, while Ewan Montagu and Charles Cholmondeley filed their final report to the XX Committee. The mission's success was absolute, but it could never be publicly acknowledged. Major Martin remained an official casualty, his identity and his purpose classified under the highest wartime restrictions. The true story might have ended there, lost among dusty files and codeword archives. Yet history has a way of unearthing its secrets. After the war, bits of the story began to emerge. In 1953, Ewan Montagu, still bound by the Official Secrets Act, published The Man Who Never Was, a carefully sanitized account of Operation Mincemeat. The book and its subsequent film adaptation revealed enough to astonish the public, but concealed the most sensitive details. The world learned of the strange deception that fooled Hitler, but not of the man whose body made it possible. For decades, the identity of Major Martin remained officially unknown. Visitors to his grave in Huelva, Spain, read the inscription, "Greater love hath no man than this." To them, he was a symbol of sacrifice, a soldier who died in service to his country. But beneath that quiet stone lay not a Royal Marine, nor a trained officer, but Glinda Michael, a Welsh drifter who had died alone in London from consuming rat poison. He had no family, no fortune, and no fame, until the war made him a legend. It was not until 1996 that declassified British documents confirmed his name and story. The truth stunned historians. The man who had deceived Hitler had been an ordinary civilian, forgotten by society, transformed into a weapon of intelligence. Glyndwr Michael had, in death, achieved what few could in life. He had altered the course of history. His grave in Huelva was updated with a new inscription acknowledging the truth. Glyndwr Michael, who served as Major William Martin, Royal Marines. Even today, visitors leave small notes and poppies at the site, tokens of gratitude to the man who never knew his purpose. The Spanish caretakers continue to tend the grave, treating it not as a curiosity but as a quiet monument to the strange, human cost of war. The legacy of Operation Mincemeat lives on in the world of modern espionage and military strategy. Its principles, meticulous attention to detail, emotional authenticity, and psychological manipulation, have shaped intelligence operations ever since. Deception became a recognized weapon of war, no less potent than the bombs and bullets that filled Europe's skies. Historians and intelligence officers alike study it as a masterclass in misdirection, a perfect illusion that relied not on technology, but on storytelling. But beyond the strategy and success lies something more haunting, a reminder of the human lives that war consumes and repurposes. Glyndwr Michael's story forces us to confront a moral paradox, that even the smallest, most forgotten life can change the fate of nations. In his anonymity, he became powerful. In his death, indispensable. Ewan Montagu once reflected, perhaps no one in the war did more to save human life, and yet he never knew he did it. His words encapsulated the quiet, almost tragic triumph of the operation. Mincemeat was not a victory won by generals or armies, but by deception, faith, and imagination. By the ability to make an enemy believe what was never true. Today, when historians recount the great operations of World War II, D-Day, Market Garden Overlord, Operation Mincemeat stands apart. It was a story of lies that saved lives, of men who fought with pens and paper instead of rifles, and of one unknown man whose body fooled an empire. As the Mediterranean tides still lap the shores of Huelva, the legend of Major William Martin endures, not as fiction, But as fact, beneath a white headstone in Spanish soil lies the most unlikely hero of World War II, the man who never was, yet forever will be remembered. The corpse that fooled an empire had completed its mission, and in doing so, it proved that in war, even death can be made to speak, if only someone dares to give it a voice.